So tonight you're going to be looking at the major events and people of the Cold War, which we've already talked about some in class, but this will just kind of be a little bit of a refresher, so it's good for you to have this in your notebook. It will be a part of your notebook check, so make sure you have it. The essential question for these notes: what were some of the major events of the Cold War? And what we're really going to be looking at is the different countries and how those different countries were involved, and how the United States got involved with those countries, because remember, we're at this point of being a superpower, so the more we're involved with other countries, the better off we feel like we're going to be. We felt like we were the world's police officer at this point. And remember, we were having that whole desire and drive to contain communism. So Eastern Europe, of course, was really heavily involved with this. That's those countries that we've talked about in class, that the borders change so often, that kind of border Russia. So that's where the Iron Curtain fell through. We talked about the Iron Curtain in class, and you drew a map of it that divided a lot of those communist or socialist nations from the democracies. We wanted to keep that Iron Curtain where it was and not allow that to be moved any further to the west. Germany, we talked about, was divided into 4 zones by the Treaty of Versailles. 3 of those zones combined as West Germany, and then 1 combined as East Germany. West Germany was, of course, the democratic part. East Germany was, West Germany was democratic. East Germany was the communist part. Berlin Wall divided Berlin into the communist and non-communist. So like I said down here, East Germany is the communist part of this nation. This is going to be part of the Iron Curtain, is that dividing line of Germany. So China. Shortly after World War II, China is going to be taken over by communists. It's going to be, the leader is Mao Zedong, and he eventually starts to declare his support, or China starts to declare its support for the Soviet Union. So the communists then united all of what is now known as the People's Republic of China. So you have a really, really big force over there between Russia and China that are attempting to spread communism and the ideas of communism even further. So the United States began this new foreign policy. It was essentially called the domino theory, that if one country fell to communism, then other countries would continue to fall to communism as well. So based on this, the U.S. begins to intervene in some of these countries that we're getting ready to talk about in order to keep the communism from spreading any further than it had already spread. So Korean War was 1950 to 1953. Once again, this is, in order to control the spread of communism. So after World War II, Korea is split into 2 nations. It's North Korea, South Korea. We looked at a map in class that shows you that split and exactly how it worked. In 1950, North Korea, which was backed by China, invaded South Korea. Of course, the United States and its allies were not excited about this because they did not want the communism to spread to South Korea. War ended with no clear winner after 2 years of stalemate. Obviously, we still hear a lot about North Korea and South Korea in the news, so it's an ongoing issue, as to what's going to happen between those 2 nations. Cuba, which is a little bit closer to home for us, just south of Florida. January 1st, 1959, Cuban Revolution ends and Fidel Castro is elected into office. Castro was in office for a long time. He actually died recently, and his brother took control. He nationalized industries, including those that were controlled by American businesses. American businesses did not like that because they were going to lose money on this nationalization. So we end our diplomatic relations with Cuba. We stop trading with them. An embargo goes into effect, which is actually still in effect today. All right, so the Bay of Pigs, which occurred in Cuba. So the Bay of Pigs is in Cuba. Castro had really close ties with the Soviet Union because he was trying to encourage the ideas of communism in Cuba. So what the CIA does under Eisenhower is they come up with this plan to invade Cuba. In the meantime, Eisenhower is no longer in office. John F. Kennedy takes the power. John F. Kennedy agrees to go ahead and go through with this Bay of Pigs mission. So on April 17th, about 1,500 Cuban exiles who had been trained for all of this ended up going back into Cuba. They land by boat at the Bay of Pigs. Castro's forces were very, very quick to react to this. And they actually ended up killing close to 300 of these Cuban exiles that were fighting for the United States, and then were able to capture the rest. It was considered a really big embarrassment for John F. Kennedy's new administration, and he spent a lot of time in his presidency trying to make up for the things that happened at the Bay of Pigs. Then we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in 1962, we have some U-2 spy planes that discover that Russia was actually putting nuclear missiles onto Cuba, which is extremely scary for the United States because it's so close to us that they have the ability to really do some harm to us. The videos that we watched of the whole, the duck and cover and all of these concerns about bomb shelters were a result of this. The United States was absolutely petrified that, we had weapons that were so close to us. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States Navy formed a blockade around Cuba. They wanted to prevent the Soviet ships from going in and out of that territory and from bringing any more weapons into Cuba. Eventually, Russia agrees to remove the weapons from Cuba, which is going to be the beginning of some forms of, hey, let's kind of try to calm down all the tensions that's going on. Although, really, it didn't calm down until the 80s, completely. Last place is Vietnam, and this is the one that people are most familiar with. 1963 to 1975. There were a lot of protests in the United States against our being involved with Vietnam, which we'll talk about in class. So in 1954, Vietnam was divided into two nations as well. So that communist side and the non-communist side. Kennedy begins to send troops and weapons into South Vietnam to keep the communism from spreading once again. Eventually, it ended just like Korea. There was a lot of deaths. There was a lot of the weather in Vietnam was not good for the American troops. It was muggy. It was hot. Lots of disease spreading. But it ends up really just kind of ending in a stalemate. So American troops come home. North Vietnam takes control in 1975. And within this time period, 58,000 Americans die and over 1.5 Vietnamese die. So it was really a rocky time for Americans and American soldiers. And we're going to look at some of the reasons that people resisted the Vietnam War. We're also going to look at some of the reasons that people felt like we should be even further involved in Vietnam. It's really kind of an interesting time, but we will check in on that in class tomorrow. Have a great one.